If you told someone in 2004 that one of the most memorable Lord of the Rings games wouldn't be a massive open world RPG, a hack and slash, or some epic cinematic action title, but instead a turn based RPG heavily inspired by Final Fantasy X, they probably would have laughed at you. And yet, here we are. The Lord of the Rings The Third Age is one of those games that lives in a strange limbo. It's rarely talked about, it never gets remastered, and it doesn't get the nostalgic hot treatment that The Two Towers or Return of the King gets, but for the players who played it, it sticks hard. This is a game where you follow just behind the Fellowship like the world's most awkward tour group. It's goofy, it's earnest, it's flawed, and it's way better than it had any right to be. To really understand the Third Age, you need to remember what the early 2000s were like for licensed games. EA had the movie license, Peter Jackson's trilogy was the biggest thing on earth, and studios were throwing everything at the wall to see what stuck. We got hack and slash movie adaptations, RTS games, action RPGs, and somehow a turn-based party RPG. EA Redwood Shores, later Visceral Games, made a very deliberate choice. Instead of retelling the movies directly, they'd create a parallel story, one that runs alongside the Fellowship. Not replacing it, not contradicting it, just awkwardly following it. Which is both the game's biggest strength and its biggest weakness. The premise of the Third Age is simple. You play as a group of original characters who are constantly arriving just after the Fellowship leaves. They see the aftermath, they clean up the mess, they fight the things Aragorn already killed. The story is told through narration by Gandalf, and this is immediately one of the game's best decisions. Gandalf recounts your party's journey as a lesser-known tale of the War of the Ring. You probably didn't hear about these guys situation. That framing does a lot of heavy lifting. It justifies why these characters aren't in the movies. It keeps the tone light and storybook-like. It makes the game feel like a side legend, not a retcon. You travel through Moria, Rohan, Helm's Deep, Osgiliath, Minas Tirith, and Mordor. Basically a greatest hits tour of Middle-earth. And yes, it's absolutely weird when you're standing in the exact same places the movie characters were, knowing full well you're not supposed to be there. But it works, more often than it doesn't. The characters are a party of who that somehow grows on you. None of the main party members are from the books or films, and that was a risky move. Shockingly, most of them are fine, some are generally good. Berethor is your protagonist, and he is the most 2004 RPG protagonist imaginable. Gondorian soldier, haunted by his past, starts low rank, wants redemption. Quiet, serious, slightly bland, and yet he works. Adriel, his strong moral compass, actually challenges Berethor's decisions. She feels like someone who exists in Tolkien's world without feeling out of place. Elgost is the range fighter, and also sarcastic, cynical, constantly unimpressed by destiny. He's the guy saying what the player is thinking. Hadhod is the dwarf, which equals automatic approval. He hits things hard, he's loyal, he hates orcs. You already know the deal. Morrowind is the wild card. She's a dual-wielding matron, has a thing for the protag, and is basically the thief class of the party. Aoden is a Rohan outrider and captain of the King's Guard. He uses a spear for combat and can manipulate enemy stats effectively. Overall, the party feels like a tabletop RPG group, doing their best not to die. Let's be honest, the combat system is blatantly inspired by Final Fantasy X. Combat is fully turn-based with a visible turn order, position-based attacks, skill cooldowns. You always know who's acting next, what abilities cost, when to defend or interrupt. It's accessible, readable, and surprisingly strategic. Each character has ability types, melee skills, range skills, buffs and debuffs, status effects, combo attacks. There's real satisfaction in staggering enemies, setting up chain attacks, exploiting weaknesses. It's slower than action games, but it fits the tone. Boss fights are gimmick-based, sometimes brutally punishing if you don't prepare. And yes, fighting a Balrog, Nazgul, the Eye of Sauron in turn-based combat is as ridiculous as it sounds, but also kind of awesome. This is a classic RPG progression loop, and it's comforting. You've got experience points, level ups, skill unlocks, equipment upgrades, parties management. Nothing revolutionary, everything functional. Weapons or armor matter, stats matter, and preparation matters. And grinding, yeah, you can grind, but the game rarely forces it unless you're underleveled or skipping fights. The Sound of Music in the Third Age uses Howard Shore's film score, and honestly, that alone carries a huge amount of emotional weight. Hearing the Fellowship theme, Mordor's motifs, Gondor's music immediately grounds the game in the film's atmosphere. Sound effects are solid, voice acting is decent for the time, and Gandalf's narration is a standout. The music does a lot of work in making the game feel more important than it maybe is. Visually, the Third Age is very mid-2000s console RPG, pre-rendered backgrounds mixed with 3D environments, character models that look better in motion than up close, but the art direction is strong. Moria feels oppressive, Helm's Deep feels worn-torn, Mordor feels hostile and bleak. It's not cutting edge, even for its time, but it's cohesive. The game also takes liberties, some big ones, but it also respects the tone. Avoids rewriting major events, keeps the focus on smaller, unseen struggles. It feels like fan fiction, but well-researched fan fiction. The kind written by someone who actually likes the source material. One thing the Third Age almost never gets credit for is how patient but firm it is with the player. This is not a mash buttons RPG. It's also not a brutally punishing one. Instead, it sits in this interesting middle ground, where it teaches you how turn-based combat actually works without explicitly telling you. By the mid-game, the gloves come off. Enemies start targeting weaker party members, using debuffs aggressively, punishing bad positioning. And suddenly you realize something important. You can't brute force this game forever. If you ignore buffs, you feel it. If you neglect defense, you feel it. If you spam your strongest move without thinking, the game lets you, and then hands you the consequences. This is where the Third Age quietly becomes a teacher. It nudges you toward party synergy, resource management, and tactile patience. And if you grew up playing action-heavy games, this might have been the first time a game forced you to slow down and think 2 turns ahead. The enemy roster is mostly drawn from recognizable Tolkien creatures, but the way they're used mechanically gives them distinct identities. Orcs aren't just cannon fodder, some are shielded, fast, status-heavy, designed to overwhelm in numbers. Uruk-hai hit hard, last longer, and punish mistakes. Wargs introduce mobility threats. Trolls demand crowd control or focused fire. Nazgul fights feel oppressive even when you know their patterns. And then there are the weird enemies, the ones invented specifically for gameplay variety. They don't always make perfect lore sense, but they shake up combat pacing. By the late game, enemy composition starts to matter more than individual enemies. It's no longer beat the orc, it's deal with its formation before it dismantles you. The Third Age is extremely linear. There's no pretending otherwise. You move from area to area along fixed paths with limited deviation, but that linearity serves a purpose. This is a guided journey, not an open-ended adventure. Each location is paced to introduce new enemy types, test recently unlocked abilities, escalate narrative stakes. You're not meant to get lost. You're meant to feel like you're being carried forward by events larger than yourself. And that fits the theme perfectly. You are not shaping Middle-earth, you are surviving it. One of the most effective narrative tools in the Third Age isn't dialogue, it's absence. You constantly arrive after important events. Battlefields are quiet, halls are empty, fires are still warm, but no one's there. You see the aftermath of heroism, the cost paid by unnamed soldiers, the destruction left behind by forces that have already moved on. It reinforces the ideal that history remembers the big names, but countless others fought and died without songs. That's the emotional core of the game, whether it's intended or not. The party doesn't have branching dialogue trees or relationship meters, but their interactions still matter. They disagree, question decisions, comment on locations and events. What's important is that none of them feel interchangeable. Each character serves a mechanical role, and those motivations don't magically disappear just because the plot demands it. They feel tired, they feel uncertain, they feel small compared to the scale of war. That grounding is what keeps the story from drifting into pure fanfiction excess, even when it absolutely flirts with it. Morality without a meter, the subtext beneath the systems. No good versus evil slaughter, no branching endings, no dialogue alignment choices. Instead, morality exists in the subtext. You're constantly surrounded by temptation. Power that makes fights easier, shortcuts that feel efficient, aggression rewarded with dominance. The game doesn't stop you, it simply shows you what that path looks like. Whether you read that as intentional commentary or accidental design, it is up to you, but it's there. Despite its length, the Third Age is surprisingly well paced. It alternates between combat-heavy stretches, narrative-focused segments, boss encounters, and short breathers. You're rarely stuck doing the same thing for too long. And because the environments change frequently, the journey feels broader than it actually is. This matters for a game designed to be finished, not endlessly replayed. As the game approaches its conclusion, it abandons restraint. Enemy difficulty spikes, abilities grow absurd. The narrative learns fully into mythic excess. This is where the game stops pretending to be subtle. It understands you've come this far. You want spectacle. You want payoff. And it gives it to you, whether or not it technically makes sense. The tonal shift is risky, but it works because it's earned through commitment. While the ending works emotionally, even if it's lore-breaking without revisiting specifics, the ending resonates because it acknowledges sacrifice, embraces impermanence, accepts obscurity. The party doesn't replace the fellowship. They don't steal the spotlight. They complete their role and fade into history. That's rare for a game, especially one tied to such a famous story. When the Third Age released, it didn't dominate headlines. Reviews were generally positive, mildly surprised, cautiously appreciative. Critics praised the combat depth, faithfulness to tone, protection value, but they also noted a lack of innovation, linear structure, derivative mechanics. It sold decently, it didn't explode. And then, it vanished. Why it never got a sequel, the answer is boring, but important. Licensing costs, changing market trends, EA's shifting priorities, the rise of action RPGs. Turn-based RPG tied to movie licenses were a hard sell by the late 2000s, so the Third Age became a one-off, which might be why it's remembered so fondly. Revisiting the Third Age now hits differently. You notice the simplicity, the earnestness, the lack of cynicism. It's not chasing trends, it's not stuffed with systems, it's not trying to be infinite. It knows what it is, it commits, it ends. That alone makes it feel refreshing. What modern games could learn from it, not mechanically, not graphically, but philosophically. The Third Age teaches that side stories matter, smaller perspectives enrich larger worlds. You don't need to be the chosen one to be worth following. That's a lesson a lot of modern games forget. The Lord of the Rings: The Third Age didn't change gaming history. It didn't redefine adaptations. It didn't spawn a genre wave, but it did something more personal. It gave players a different way into Middle-earth, a slower, more reflective experience. A story about endurance rather than glory, and for those who played it at the right time, that was enough.